Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Raven, the podcast that brings you great stories and great artists. I am Jason Lavelle, your host and your friend. This is season 2 of The Raven, and I'm very excited to be back. This season is going to be a little different. I'm diversifying, and I am going to be including some artists from beyond the literary scene. And I think you'll be very happy about the new content. But enough about me. Today I have a very special guest. This is her second time on The Raven, and I have to say, the more I hear about Kathrin Hutson and the more books of hers I read, the more of a fan I become. So Kathrin, welcome to The Raven. How are you today?
Hi, Jason. Thank you for the welcome. Doing good. I'm glad to be back again. Well, not back for the second time, but on your show for the second time. So thanks.
You are very welcome. And you're looking great today. The dreads are on point.
Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
I know
They
that
have.
that's an important thing.
Well, yeah, when you got them, it's very important.
I spent extra time with this morning,
Well done.
just getting it into the right, rectangular shape under my chin here.
Excellent.
And I love this because it hides that a little roll that's right here, so you never know. You'll never be able to tell. Okay, so I'm going to tell you all right now that I cannot be totally objective in this interview because the book we're going to be talking about, I absolutely loved. I just love this novel. That being said, Kat, before you read for us, can you give us a little bit of a breakdown on Sleepwater Beat? What is this book about?
Yes, Sleepwater Beat is the first book in the Blue Helix series, and this is LGBT dystopian sci-fi. And let's break it down. This is Leona Tiefler's story, and she lives in a world very much like our own, eerily like our own world right now. And she has the special ability to make anyone who hears her speak a certain type of way believe absolutely anything that she says. And I call this ability, which is to elicit physical responses in people who hear words spoken in a certain way. I call it the beat. So she has this beat spinning ability, and she has no idea what to do with it in her life or how to integrate it with who she wants to be. She doesn't even know who that is, and who she can trust, who she wants to surround herself with. And within this very eerily paralleling world to our own, she finds other people who have the beat ability, and well, they find her, excuse me, and kind of drag her into this underground society of people who have this ability, who are marginalized and living on the fringe, because the entire world, and more specifically the US government, doesn't want them around. They're terrified of people with this beat. They can't understand them. They don't know why they have it. They don't know what they can do. And Leo gets sucked into this underground world of, sort of like black market trade, really. And she's trying to find herself and make relationships, and just kind of be normal. She doesn't know what that is. There is no normal in this book. And she is bringing an entire past with her that makes all of that incredibly difficult to do. There's a lot going on here. I touch on a lot of things. So
Well, the U.S. government discriminating against people that they don't understand, that doesn't sound very realistic, Kat.
No, not at all. It was not a reflection of anything in real life whatsoever. And that was actually, one of my underlying intentions with creating people who had this ability, who were discriminated against and marginalized and quieted and pushed down, was my attempt to sort of comment on every marginalized group, mostly just the feeling of being part of a community that is unheard and feared and loathed and treated differently legally and politically and, you know, humanely or not. And, you know, I, of course, won't say that every marginalized community is the same, or that they, you know, that everyone experiences the same type of, excuse me, that everyone faces the same type of discrimination within each group. But I wanted to sort of remove that extra charged energy from touching on those specific real life um, communities and put them into something that doesn't exist today with people who have this ability to spin the beat, and just highlight that, you know, this is something they were born with. They can't control, they can't change it, they don't have a choice, and they're still facing all of this stuff from the rest of the world.
And by creating it in a fictional sense, you're also, I think, making it more accessible to any marginalized people, because they're not thinking, oh, that's just about this person or this person. So
Right, it's not for me.
yeah. Well, I cannot wait to hear your reading. I don't know what Catherine's going to be reading for us this morning, but so I'm excited. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away, because we want to hear.
Excellent. So I literally just opened the book this morning and started reading, and I was like, oh yeah, that'll do. Timed it, and something around 10 minutes maybe. Is that too long? 10 minutes?
Oh no, rocket.
Okay. All right, here we go.
I'm just gonna make faces at you over here. So
well, I won't be looking, so I'll be reading. Excellent. Okay. Excuse me. He actually set up a real interview for her the next night. She didn't have any clothes, didn't know what to do for a real job, so she brushed out her hair. Looking good had been as easy for her as licking her own elbow. Good thing you're not trying to impress him with looks, Carl said, flashing her a quick glance as he came around the side of the car. She made a face at him. Thanks? Why's that? He's gay. He ran a hand through his hair. Apparently, looking good was more important to him. He'd abandoned his stained t-shirt for a flannel button-down and maybe his only pair of jeans with no holes. She choked on a laugh. She flicked the cigarette behind the station wagon and hurried to catch up. A bouncer stood at the door and glared in every direction. He recognized Carl and stood aside, opening the door to let out a blast of music and neon lights. Leo reflected the bouncer's scowl as he stared her into the club. She didn't like being looked at for too long, especially like that. Got a problem? She had to almost yell it over the music. The giant, bearded man turned away from the parking lot to frown down at her. She was at most half his size. I got it, Ed, Carl said. His hand went around Leo's wrist, and he pulled her and her challenge of a stare into the hall. Let's not start trouble first thing in the night, okay? He yelled. Save that for later. He didn't look at her, but guided her through the first wave of people. She would have yanked her arm back if he hadn't dropped it first. The last time she'd gone to a club was in high school, using her words on the bouncer to let her and Alex inside. They'd made a time of it for a while. Cocaine, booze, toying with the strangers on the dance floor. But that was when they could still convince themselves that everything was just fun and games. It had been a long time since Leo felt the need to drown herself in pleasure. Clubs seemed pointless now. Bodies moved around them, sucking them in, dissolving them into the crowd of sweat and skin and lights. She stayed 2 steps behind Carl. He was one of those people who wouldn't stop and wait for someone to match his pace, but he kept turning back to make sure she was still there. She could barely hear her own thoughts, but had a brief vision of Carl grabbing her hand to yank her through faster. She shoved her hands into her pockets. He sidestepped and retracted his arms from a good number of girls who grabbed at him to dance. He didn't smile, didn't even look at them. If she hadn't seen the picture of his wife, she would have thought he had no interest in women whatsoever. Leo wouldn't have minded at all if 1 or 2 of them reached out for her like that, but no such luck. His square shoulders made a path, and she kept up before the bodies filled the hole. The door looked like an exit, plain metal with no sign or signal. A back bar had been placed by it, manned only by a skinny Asian in a suit who looked like he couldn't lift a pistol. No bouncer, no bodyguard. Carl knocked once, and they waited. She had time to let the music and her nerves sink in, and with one eye on Carl, she sidled to the bar. Shot of whiskey, she told the Asian. He looked her over, flashed a smile of straight ice cube teeth, and pulled out a shot glass. Who you here with? Not you. Carl's big hand grabbed her arm and yanked her away. I told you, no stupid shit, he whispered, his lips tickling her ear. I can have one. What's the big deal? She hissed, struggling against his grip. He only let her go when she was back inside. He only let her go when she was back beside him in front of the door. You're gonna spin a beat for Lewis. That's the big deal. Even one drink and he'll know you're not straight. Then he'll kick you out on your skinny ass and I'm fucked too. He glared at her, his eyes darting between her and the door. She folded her arms and stood back against the wall. We have one chance. If you really don't give a shit, tell me now and we'll leave. Leo bit the inside of her cheek and finally glanced at him. You afraid of this guy or something? She regretted that, but she didn't like being told what to do. He looked down at her, gave her the briefest hint of a smile, and then the door opened from the other side. After you. He smirked and waved her first. He smirked and waved her in first. The door pulled open into what some might call the VIP room. Black leather couches lined the walls. Soft lights glimmered on the hard surfaces, the stainless steel corners of the tables, the gray walls with gleaming runners. It was full of people. Groups had broken off into different areas, huddled around one or two in each group who commanded full attention. Leo watched their faces. Some listeners hunched forward with eagerness. Others sat back in contentment, smiling as though they were soon to unbutton their pants after a full meal. A few faces soured with discomfort, but all eyes centered on those who spoke. The low hum of indecipherable conversation made it easy for her to take in the view, but she couldn't hear anything. The club music drowned out the laughter, the sounds of dancing and drinks, and this room vibrated like a quiet motor underneath her feet. A hand on her lower back brought her back to herself. Carl leaned toward her. 11 o'clock. She looked. It had to be Lewis. His blazer might have been purple velvet, somewhere between pimp and Italian mafia, but with a flair he somehow pulled off. He had a thin nose, long but delicate, as if he could pull her thoughts out of the air by sniffing. Two beady black eyes plotted some mischief underneath his generously oiled and coiffed hair, a few curls drifting down over his forehead. A manicured hand stroked a short, full goatee, and his smile seemed made of candy. Sweet, but too much of it would make you sick. He was listening to one of the speakers, a beat maker, Leo assumed, with forced indifference. He failed to notice them until they stood directly in front of his armchair. Lewis sighed, tilted his head, and formed a slow path with his eyes to their faces. Leo had to force her mouth into a tight smile when she felt it threatening a grimace. The fucker was stuck up. The beat lord pursed his lips. Carl, he said, one corner of his mouth curving up with a flip of his gelled hair. You're back. With a pet. Carl lowered his head but would not break the gaze. I told you we were coming. Yes, you did. Lewis clapped his hands. And look, there's room for you both. His hand came down on his neighbor's knee, then fluttered toward the other end of the room. Two of the listeners picked up and moved without a word. Lewis grinned, teeth and eyes flashing alike, and motioned to the empty seats. The speaker in Lewis's group must have drawn his story to a close as they took their seats. Carl made sure to sit himself between Leo and the master of the back room beat. Lewis eyed him with something between hunger and craving. The group around them was quiet, and she noted the look in the listener's eyes, like a foggy mirror clearing after opening the bathroom door. A few of them blinked, and most tried not to meet each other's gazes. Carl cleared his throat, and Lewis clapped once. Yes, well, that was certainly entertaining, he said flatly. He turned his gaze toward her, and one eye twitched. You. His hand flittered like a frightened bird. Leo, Carl added. Leo. Lewis's smirk made her want to throw her chair into the center of the room. Right. You have one chance, 20 minutes. She quickly glanced at Carl, who nodded once. Taking a breath, she began. At first, there were only a handful of people in their small group, the ones more easily amused by the last storyteller. After 5 minutes, the group doubled. Then most of the room stood around the circle of chairs, all aimed in her direction. They were enraptured, satisfied. gasping, laughing, and sighing in all the right places, but none of them looked directly into her eyes or at each other. Like eye contact would contract a venereal disease of the mind, not to mention more discomfort than the room was pumping out on its own. Louis stroked his goatee, nose pointed toward the ceiling, the smug corner of his mouth upturned. She tried to go for the absurd again, to trump the beat at Bernadette's, because this time she was somewhat prepared. A childhood fairy tale, complete with witches, magic wands, spells, and flying things. Nonsense. The first few words made her feel like a child again, hoping that whatever wandering adult passing by would believe the embellished lies. But, like the end of her childhood, people started believing the lies, no matter how far-fetched. When more listeners moved to her circle, she gained confidence and even changed a few of the details, adding some tiny oddity that from anyone else would have ruined the story completely. She made sure nobody could ever have taken her seriously. No one scoffed or rolled their eyes or got up from their seats. Captivated, they followed her story like breaking news, like they could be next on the journey of her make-believe hero. When she finished, the lounge was silent, all eyes aimed toward her but not on her. Gripping the arms of her chair, she leaned back and tried to melt into the leather seat. Carl was bent over with a fist to his forehead, frowning. Louis untwined his fingers from his beard and blinked at the ceiling. Then he clapped once and fluttered both hands toward the gathered crowd. Get back to your boring lives. The spectators dispersed throughout the room. A good handful left the lounge, faces not yet cleared of the same fog. Louis barely turned his head toward her, trying to ignore a beggar in his court. That was 23 minutes. She sat up straight, ready to stand. But Carl grabbed her knee so tightly she thought he meant to throw her. Carl, Louise continued, pulling lint from his jacket sleeve. That was a bit overdone. She's raw. Naturally. He tilted his head. But there's use for a beat that can draw the entire room. Again, that sticky sweet smile flashed briefly in her direction. You can handle her, if you want. I do. Carl would not meet her gaze. I need a certain talent to deal with the world outside my kingdom. Louis's lips curled. Leo almost grabbed her own eyeballs to keep from rolling them. We'll start with some pesky flies who have been buzzing around my club for a few days, looking for something they won't find, of course. He rubbed the corner of his eye and surveyed the tip of his finger. Nevertheless, it affects business. His eyes flickered toward Leo. When you're finished, I want a story too. A beat. Make it good, make it entertaining, worth the trouble you'll cause. Fine. And I will pay you. Carl stood, and Leo followed his lead. Louis fixed her with an unblinking stare. She couldn't decide whether she wanted to stare him down or get the fuck out of there.
Excellent. Well
Thank
done.
you.
Well done. Oh, so as you all could hear, there is some naughty language in this book. This is not a YA book, and you know,
Quite.
I didn't get that until a few paragraphs in. I was very, very pleasantly surprised, but
Till a few paragraphs, I'm pretty sure the first word is a curse word. We'll just start with that.
Well, you know, I live in a house full of teenagers, so maybe I'm just used to it all the time.
Right. I had somebody read this book, and I was talking to them afterward, and I was like, yeah, there's a lot of foul language in here, as I'm sure you've noticed. And this person was like, I didn't really notice until like this one scene, which is like 3/4 of the way through the book. And I was like, well, I guess you're used to it too. But it's hard to find a passage with that low amount of this in there.
Yes, but no, it's that's good though. I really appreciate that. Now our main character here, Leo or Leona, which was her given name, but I like Leo. You know, I don't know if we were supposed to fall in love with her right away, but I totally did. Leo was my girl, and you know, tell me a little bit about her character. You know, how did you craft her in such a way that she'd be so accessible to all of us, and so and that we'd be so willing to just give her our hearts?
Because she's me.
Well, that's a little
Surprise!
presumptuous of you. Are you saying you're lovable too?
Barely. Barely. No, I think that is one of the reasons why this book has been so well received and has been enjoyed and has made an impact on so many different kinds of people. And this is what I am hearing from readers specifically. And yeah, one of the reasons that makes it so accessible to everyone is because Leo's story and Leo's character are both so intertwined with my life, my past, my experiences and history, and who I am, or who I am on the inside, and I don't let anybody else see it. So this is a way for me to open that up and let people see it. Well, that was not my intention to make a character that was me, but every time I turned a corner in the story and got to the next point, wondering. I'm a complete pantser, so I didn't know where it was headed. I knew the ending, but everything else in between there is totally fair game, which I love. And every time I had to pick a new, like, what's going to happen to her, what is she going to experience and go through, it just felt right to add reflections of my own history and my own experience because it fit the story, and her was perfect.
Well, and you told me early on that there's a lot of yourself in this book, and I think that as authors, we always include a little bit of ourselves or our past or our surroundings in our work, but Sleepwater Beat is really something different. And as and without knowing you very, very well personally, without knowing your past, without having grown up with you, it's strange for me to say this, but I think that as a reader, I could really feel that there was something different, something special going on with it. Tell me a little bit more about this connection that you have with Sleepwater and why it means so much to you to have created this.
Yeah, well, I mean, going off of the putting myself into this book, I hope that fiction authors are putting at least a little bit of themselves into everything they write, because that is what brings the reality and the rawness and the real truth of story into it, is real people, right? This was really a big deal for me in writing this book, and then more so publishing it and releasing it to the world, is that it has more of me in it than any other book, short story, anything that I have ever written. And I don't know why it happened to be this book. I don't know why it came at the time that it did. I wrote most of it before I got pregnant and finished it right before my daughter was born. I don't think that has much to do with it because I'd already started before that point. But there was also so much that I wanted to say with this book. So it started off as really my desire to comment on what I was seeing at the time in my life and in my particular community where I was living and all the places that I had been at that point. Just the sort of complacency of the masses and people not paying attention to what was going on around them in the world. And so I, was trying in my own way to kind of bring those issues and those topics up to the surface through really good story and through real, raw, authentic characters, which is, I think, the best way to bring something up. I could have gone a George Orwell style, but that's just really in your face, like all the punches. I didn't want to do that because I want story and character to be above all, first and foremost. And I think that happened very well in this book. And I also think that the messages I was trying to highlight also came out very well. I've heard some really fantastic things from readers who tell me, I love the way you covered this topic. I love the way you approached this and explained it and brought it to light. And I didn't even have to say anything to them about it. Like, I don't have to prompt you for this. Excellent. I got it across perfectly.
Well, you know what it kind of reminded me of, and I hope you take this as a compliment. And in fact, I think that your book was much better than this, but only because I recently reread Fahrenheit 451,
yeah.
Ray Bradbury, and reading your book, I was like, wow, we've got a story, but we've also got social commentary as well, which is really interesting. And I think the big difference is that your story, I think, was a lot better than it was much more entertaining to me. It wasn't so bogged down with a social commentary, but I think it was played an equally important role in it. And guys, I know that Kathrin is being a little vague about some of these things. Don't worry, I'm going to nail her down on some of these subjects later
I
on.
didn't want to ruin your question, so I'm just keeping it at the top right here.
She is a pro at this. She is a pro at this. So this book is, I've heard you describe it and compare it to other books, but to me, this book really, it read like a thriller. It's fast paced. There's lots of action. There's some sex. There's some violence. Okay, a lot of violence. But there really is something more to it. There's that depth that I really couldn't put my finger on, and I feel like it's not just the social commentary, because social commentary is something that many of us can put into our books, and many of us don't put into our books very well. But
and I was terrified of that. Let me just say, the minute that this book came out, I said, oh my God, I did it wrong. I was like, I did not capture this. Like, I was so proud of myself. I was way overconfident. What am I thinking?
You did not do it wrong. You did not.
I'm getting that now, but a year ago, I was terrified that I totally screwed the whole thing up. So
Well,
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize.
Had to say that part.
But there's a different kind of depth in it too, and it's on more of an emotional level. And I'm always really careful when I say things like that, because there's books that have a lot of emotions that I really, really dislike. And I will give you an example, and it doesn't mean anyone else has to dislike it, but like the Twilight books, okay? Those are insanely popular, and overall, it was a cool story. She made tons of money off it, lots and lots of fan. But reading the books, there was so much overdone emotion that I just kind of it got drowned out to me, and I ended up skipping paragraph after paragraph. I'm like, oh my God, I can't handle this. But this book, it wasn't like I was just reading about Leo's emotions. It was almost as if I was feeling them. And that's a big frickin' thing. I mean, and that's something I haven't really been able to do with my own writing. And now how did you do that?
How did I mean, I can come back to the same place. I put myself in it. All of Leo's emotions, literally every single one of them, I have experienced myself. I can't, yeah, absolutely every single one of them. And with her, of course, I don't have a beat ability, and I can't make people believe absolutely everything I say is true. But no, you want me to skip over this?
No, you go ahead and finish, and then I'm gonna contradict you.
Oh, maybe. You don't even know. So as I was saying, I don't have this beat spinning ability. And at the same time, I was a little bit proud of myself, and also wanting people to see this connection, this parallel that my beat spinning ability is writing, and that is my superpower, and that is what I have always been told that I was very good at, and what I always thought I was good at and didn't quite understand. And so, especially the relationship that Leo has with her beat is very much what my relationship used to be with my writing. In that knowing underneath in the core exactly what I can do. She knows exactly what she can do. She knows exactly how to use it, and she still doesn't trust that how people are reacting to her beat, why they want her in their organization, or if they just want her, or if they just want her beat, if they're telling her the truth about herself, if she's doing this because it's just something to do or doing it because it is a part of her. That is how I used to feel about my writing as well. So just all of those things that she experiences with other people in social situations. Let me tell you, I used to be a lot more awkward than I am now, and Leo's mind is basically a narrator for my own head at specific points in different times of my life. There you go.
Well, you ruined it.
I knew I would. That's why I told you to be quiet.
You ruined it, Kat. Damn it. And okay, so we'll go off on an odd tangent here. And
Okay.
I actually I wrote Kat a message and told her this, that after I finished Sleepwater Beat, that night I actually had a dream that her and I were emailing back and forth with each other, spinning beats, but in the way that authors spin beats, where we try to convince our readers to feel something or believe something using our special ability, which, as Kat just said, is our words. And some of us happen to be exceptional at it. And she really is. So what I was planning on doing was interrupting her and telling her, "But you do have a beat. It's your writing." And then she totally ruined it. Big frickin' jerk, big
That's me.
dreadlocky jerk over there.
That's me.
Um,
Dirty
yeah.
hippies.
All right. Well, fine. Well, let me ask you a question then. How about that? Let me
Okay.
find a good question to ask you.
Make it good.
Oh, this is a good one. It is.
Okay.
There are some very dark veins that course through this novel, and as a child of darkness myself, I
Mm-hmm.
approve and I absolutely love them, but they're jarring, and I think to some people they would be very jarring. And one of those dark veins is the seemingly ubiquitous substance abuse and addiction. Can you tell me a little bit about how this kind of strand of darkness made its way into Sleepwater Beat?
Yes, I can. Good question. So
I
I
got a
always
good
knew.
question, guys. I got a good question.
Yeah, you got one in. Yes. I always knew that I was going to be um when I sat down to turn these ideas into a novel and make Sleepwater Beat, I knew that I was going to be approaching some um uh some issues about, pharmaceutical industry and, the medical insurance industry and Western medicine. And I kind of ended up uh, putting those in a mixing bowl with 24-hour news cycle and this fake news stuff that we've got going on. But I I have strong opinions about pharmaceutical companies and medicine, Western medicine in particular. Um, so that coming into this, that's overarching drug use that you're talking about was most of it was talking about the use of this drug called Pointera, which I made up for the story and researched a lot so I could say exactly what it was that I wanted it to do. And it's all over the news and all over the country, and people are excited to take it and they're ready to up their performance and their attention span and their output and production and blah blah blah, corporate, like, better yourself stuff. Um, and then there is also that seedy underbelly of this drug and of pharmaceuticals and of the way that Western medicine and the media and just the whole everything pushes these things out to people and pumps drugs and medications into people, and I dove into this sort of underbelly, dark side, evil twin of Western medicine, in pretty much the very beginning, opening right up with a scene from Leo's past as a child, and her father is sitting on his ratty armchair in their living room that's completely destroyed. And he is passed out with a buddy of his, and they have needles in their arms, and they've been, well, we find out later, they have been, they've been shooting Pointera, and then that's part of the story, and that goes on and on and on. But I brought, again, myself into this, and these dark veins into this to show that underbelly of my social commentary part of things, because I struggled for many years with a heroin addiction, and I lived that part of it as well. And so writing the scenes in Leo's dad's house when she was a child and a minor, and living in his care and actually really taking care of him, reflected a lot of stuff about my experience with drug abuse, and the places that I have stayed in, and the people that I met and interacted with during that time in my life. And I have almost 9.5 years clean now, so it's quite well behind me, and I think that was what allowed me to write this book with that specific vein of darkness. And it's something that a lot of people don't want to talk about, is drug addiction and drug abuse, and so much of it stems from pharmaceuticals and Western medicine. And I could go on and on. I don't want to get on a platform. There's the book, but and it's not a bullhorn of like down with pharmaceuticals, but I also consider drug addicts and alcoholics and anyone who's struggling with addiction as another marginalized community of people, because I have been a part of it. I was very much a part of it, and I was also very much a part of that sort of in between community of, you've got your addicts, and you've got the people who are adults and living their lives, and doing what you're supposed to do, and everything looks good and they're happy. And then somewhere in between is this other what I feel is a marginalized group of people who have been totally down in the dark road and path, and they haven't quite reached that like successful, in anyone's individual interpretation of success, they haven't reached that like, this is what my life can be, the complete opposite of being an addiction. And the people in the middle kind of just they get forgotten, or they get overlooked, or like people just walk down the street and people don't even see these people who are struggling so hard to lift themselves back up out of that super dark place. And so I lived in in that middle too for a couple of years, and so it was important for me to show all sides of that. And I think that's what brought up, it started with addiction with Leo's dad, and how that it started off as him using this new drug to help his career, and it totally destroyed his life. So we see that with Leo, and we see what it does to him eventually. I'm not going to give any spoilers. And then when Leo ends up living on the streets and taking care of herself with her beat, which is where the book opens, that is, my reflection of that smaller marginalized community of people who are just coming out of addiction and just trying to rebuild their lives. And I wasn't quite homeless, but almost at one point in time. So like I said, bringing all that dark stuff still coming right out of me, and coming right out of what I have been through in my life.
Now, did it feel good to write about these dark times, or what did you go through doing it? Because I imagine there's kind of a number of things that kind of are churning in your head as you're finally releasing that.
Yeah, well, it didn't feel like a release to me when I was writing it. It felt like oh, I know this. This needs to be part of the story, and I know it. I can do it justice. I can deliver this with authenticity and a real raw, like putting readers right there into the story, because it's been real for me and it's real for Leo, and I can make it real for anyone else who wants to step through these doors. And let's see, it was 3 years 3 years ago that I finished the first draft of this book. So my daughter just turned 3, and I was just at the end of my pregnancy with her when I finished the very first draft of this. Um, and so at that point, I'd been clean for 4.5 years, and I had done. It took me more soul searching and more self-care and forgiveness of myself in those 4 years just to be able to write again, because I hadn't written for that entire time. So Sleepwater Beat was also like this, I am writing again, and I can write again after taking such a huge break, by necessity, and then also by like punishing myself for the choices that I've very intentionally made at that point in time. And so I came back into it wanting to prove to myself that I could still write, that this was still my beat, this was still what I could do. And it wasn't my intention at all at the beginning to start off with something that, is a dark place experience that most people don't ever have in their lives. But that a lot of people are uncomfortable with approaching, uncomfortable with exploring, seeing, talking about, just like any other, marginalized community facing discrimination. It's one of those things. And so it felt less for me and more for potential readers and more for Leo herself to write this into the story. It wasn't an emotional clearing for me. It wasn't like
a catharsis of some sort.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had already gone through all of that, and now I just wanted to write it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that without knowing, but it was probably better for it. I think that having already gone through that emotional release probably made your writing a little bit clearer,
Yes.
less clouded. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if there are any children listening or watching, you might want to, put the earmuffs on them, because I want to talk a little bit about sex here.
Oh,
So
really? I
this
know how
book,
it
the,
works. Gotcha.
yeah, you got me. So
Mm,
Sleepwater Beat is not a romance. That's very, very
thank you.
clear. And I want that to be clear. Yes, I would not have enjoyed it nearly as much if it was a romance.
Me neither.
However, there is love in Sleepwater Beat, and there are some surprisingly erotic sex scenes that pair perfectly with the really tense, kind of action-packed, violent pace. So, tell me
Mhm.
about the decision to write sex into this novel, and how you did it in such a way that it was going to be effective for the reader as a beat, but
Mhm.
also didn't pull this book into that mushy, romancy category.
Right. So I first wanted to show the relationship between Leo and Alex, who was Leo's high school girlfriend, um, and pretty much the only person who knew for a long, long time that Leo could spin a beat. And they were very, very close and very good for each other in a lot of ways. And I really wanted to highlight that relationship between them in order to juxtapose it against everything that Leo left behind when she left her town and where she grew up, and trying to keep Alex safe, trying to keep herself safe, trying to run away from all the problems anyway. So
high highs and low lows, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I had to write the full depth of Leo and Alex's relationship as teenagers in high school, to show that difference in Leo by the time that we meet her. It's not a big difference, but it is enough to know, like, oh, okay, this is what happened to this chick and why she, okay, I get it. And so that, writing a few sex scenes, those perhaps weren't the intensely erotic sex scenes that you're talking about, but those were a way for me to further show that relationship between Leo and Alex. And this is an LGBT book. It's speculative fiction with LGBT characters, and I honestly really enjoy um, writing lesbian sex scenes way better than straight sex scenes. It's just more fun for
Me
me.
too.
So, hey, why not? There's also that part of just like, this will be great. Stick it in there because it entertains me, and because I want to see more. Um, I want to see more queer sex scenes that aren't erotica and that aren't just like porn, you know. And I think I did a pretty good job of
Well,
finding a
and
sweet spot with these scenes.
well, and let me clarify. When I say erotic sex scenes, I'm not saying erotic to say they were extremely graphic. I mean they were filled with emotion. You could feel the intensity of it, and to me that makes something really erotic, really really sensual, that you're just like, oh my goodness, this is such a powerful scene, and even if it's something that most all of us do, you can write them poorly or you can write them really well, just
Right.
like anybody can do.
Right.
But and
Yeah.
you mentioned, you want to see more queer relationships, and I really wanted to talk to you about that, about representation. This book features LGBTQ characters and their relationships, both emotional and physical, and representation for LGBTQ characters has been lacking for many, many years. And when they have been included, they've often been either cardboard cutout characters or characters whose behavior is inaccurate and extremely offensive. That's made to pander to straight white men that want to fantasize about girls having sex, and it really is, it's very offensive. If you're reading porn, okay, whatever, read porn.
Right.
But if we're reading fiction, I want to see a little bit of reality. Can you tell me a little bit more about the LGBTQ characters in Sleepwater Beat and why it was important for you to give us some good representation there?
Yeah, definitely. So while Leo is a queer character, I'm not gonna stick her in any kind of box because that's just impossible for her. I don't even want to try. She's queer. We'll just go with that. And her high school girlfriend, and Kaylee, of course, which is the other sort of love interest for
Love
Leo.
that
I know.
girl. Love
she's
Kaylee. Oh my God, I love her.
she is intense.
Yeah.
Not in the annoying like this chick's a uh, she's not annoying and she's not awful, but she is very silently, stoically intense. Reflected sort of in a much different juxtaposition by her beat, which is, I'm going to put it out there, she physically hurts people with her words, and she can
It's
control how
amazing. Oh my God.
she gets really really badass with it at the end. And
Once upon a midnight dreary, as I pondered, weak and weary. Oh, I got
and,
chills.
and Leo's like, what is she like reciting Poe right now while she's torturing people? This is like, what is happening? So that just popped into my head, and it was very fun to write. But yes, Leo and Kaylee uses her beat also during the sex scenes with Leo, and that was very intentionally. I wanted to, and again, I was trying to turn this like, yes, this is like a romance sort of blooming, and they're into each other, and there's sexual tension and it's physical, but I didn't want it to. I wanted it to be the exact opposite of the relationship with Alex that Leo had, and so
There's
I
nothing
wanted to.
soft about it.
No,
No.
not at all. And even when Kaylee gets up and leaves, and just like, all right, good, you're good, I'm good, bye. Like that's it. And I had a lot of people tell me like, why would you do that to me? I didn't do it to you. I did it to Leo, and like that's part of the fun. And to show that intensity and to highlight the differences. So I had those two different well, there's more than two, but two different types of sex scenes with two different queer characters and Leo. And then there's also Lewis, and he is such a hugely complicated character. And I actually was at a library here in Vermont just a few days ago, and I got to talk to a book group who had actually read the book, which is so much fun. And one of the women who showed up said that she really, really loved Lewis and his character, and it has nothing to do with being being an LGBTQ character at all. She was like, I didn't know in the beginning whether or not I wanted to like him or wanted to hate him, and like what his deal was, till we find out at the end that he is, really, really, he's been through a lot. You find out why he is the way he is when, everything kind of comes to light at the end. And he also has a thing for Carl, which perhaps many people do. But that was I tried to make that low key because it's one of those like, there's a lot of tension going on and there's a lot of like small group dynamics happening. And I by no means wanted to make this, we're hooking everybody up left and right, because that's not what it's about. But those tense emotions and like really hardcore, like, I resent you, but I'm into you, and I'm gonna play this power game with you, and you're not even interested in like playing the game at all, and those happen in these small groups and community of anyone, doesn't matter. And I wanted to write these LGBTQ characters into Sleepwater Beat and the Blue Helix series, which I plan to continue, because, like I mentioned, really the only other LGBTQ characters that I have seen in speculative fiction are, it's either a weird fetish erotica or like aliens and like and or romance, but it is very cookie cutter, and it is very like, we're just going to play to the stereotypes of this, and I'm not into like romance as a main plot point. And I still do see a huge lack of LGBTQ representation in speculative fiction, just as like for everyone, speculative fiction, where story comes first and the character's sexual orientation or identity is just as important to the story, but then just as not highlighted as like your cisgendered character's hair color, right? Like it's people being people in the story, and there's a lack of that, and I want more of that, because that is my life too. I don't go around saying like, hey, I consider myself queer in many ways, so pay attention to me. That's not, it's like just living life and showing these stories, while also, it was a big deal for me not being afraid to put that much of myself into these books. Because honestly, I think for the most part, writing this and publishing it and releasing it to the world was more of like me screaming from the rooftop, like, hey, this is all of me right now. Everyone, mom and dad, take from it what you will. you know, and I want to be able to with my fiction and with the story that I tell, stand up in my own way for these marginalized communities that I am a part of, or have been a part of, and just bring that sense of like, this is normal, these are people, this is life, and we'll look at it from a different point of view.
I think that's absolutely perfectly put. Beautiful.
Thank you.
And we just need, I think we just need a lot more people to read this to really understand what you're saying.
That'd be great.
I think that's wonderful. Well, we are kind of about at the end of our time here, and I just want to say again to everyone that I absolutely love this book. You know, I really encourage you to check it out. We've talked a lot about it, and it really is a complex but beautiful piece of fiction that, I mean, it reads like a thriller. I mean, you will burn through this in just a couple days. You know, Kat, is there anything else that you'd like us to know about Sleepwater Beat?
It's not happy. there is some hope left at the end. Excuse me, which is how I like to end all of my work. But it's not a happy, everything gets resolved and the hero gets her cake and eats it too kind of thing. So you've been warned. If all this conversation wasn't enough already to tell you what's inside this book, just don't go into it thinking there's going to be a happy ending. That's all I want to say.
It's very intense. It's not all sad. It's not all bad, but it's very intense. Well, Kat, where do we find all of your books? I know you're on Amazon, but do you have a central website that we funnel people to?
I sure do. That's KathrinHutsonFiction.com. And there are links to all my books. You can order paperbacks directly from me on my website as well. And then I am available.
Signed paperback.
Well, yeah, I mean, hey, yeah, if you want. Jason, I will send you a signed book. You got to buy it through my website. I'll send it to you.
Deal.
And then I'm also, my books are also available across the board. So Amazon, like you said, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books. Pretty much anywhere that you can think of finding books, wherever you get yours. My books are, I'm 95% certain my books are there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Kat. You've been wonderful.
Thank you for having me again, Jason. This is awesome.
See you, everybody.
Bye.